Hi, my name is Jim Ryan, and I'm the new instructional designer here at EWU. My job here is to take a look at the programs, courses, and people from a different point of view, to see how all these Lego pieces fit, and to imagine how I can help put them together differently to make something new and amazing. Welcome to the Play to Learn podcast. Today, I'm meeting with Grant Pemberton, owner of homesteadbrand.com, a leatherworking business he runs out of his garage, and it's just down the street from where I live. Grant has a fascinating history as well as an Instagram account where he weaves in storytelling, philosophy, and education into his fun and quirky posts. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Well, hi, Grant.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Yeah,
So we actually met, I want to almost say like a year ago,
probably. Yeah.
when my wife had a fake Hermès
Purse. Right.
from China
I see a lot of those.
that she sourced, and it didn't quite have all the holes
Right.
it was supposed to have. And you generously offered your services.
Yeah.
And you just were down the road from where I live.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how we first met. And then after that, I started following you on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is really why I'm here in the first place, because I think that your social media is a masterclass in instructional design for social media.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But before we get to that,
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah. I've got a pretty diverse background. I did go to Eastern. And so I grew up actually in Southern California. Moved up to Spokane in high school, went to East Valley High School, was very much into aviation. I got my pilot's license and I was going to be an airplane mechanic. And my dad said, hey, why don't you go to university? He didn't finish university. He got into a small family business early on and never finished school. And he pretty much said, I'll pay for it. And I said, well, I haven't taken the SAT. And he said, well, see if you can get into Eastern. And so I think I took the SAT a few months before fall. And so I did my undergrad there. I was very engineering minded, pivoted to history like everyone does, and ended up with a master's in linguistics from Eastern. And I was actually an English teacher in China for 6 years right out of school. And then long story short, my dad's business is in aerospace. He said, I'm having a heck of a time with the Chinese market. I just culturally and the language. So he said, if you ever wanted, to come back. And at that time I was thinking business after I realized I probably needed a PhD to pursue, further higher ed. So from there, it was aerospace using my Chinese language skills, kind of in a sales role. Then I went to Honeywell Electronic Materials here in the Valley. And then I went to a drone company. It was a startup in Coeur d'Alene. And again, they needed somebody that had some technical know-how in aerospace and could speak Chinese because they were going to manufacture these in China. And then from there, I was another pivot. A friend of mine, he's kind of a headhunter. He said, hey, this local boot company is looking for somebody that knows, lean manufacturing and process improvement. And, he said, it's Nick's Boots. And I thought, Nick's Boots, like that small hole in the wall on Market Street, And he says, no, somebody bought the brand and they put a couple million into it and they really want to grow it. So that was like, I guess, returning to my roots. I'd always liked to work with my hands. I'd been in kind of tech and aerospace. And then I remember touring the place and I was just like, I cannot believe this is happening in the United States still, like very handmade, really well-made boots. So I was the general manager there for 7 years. And then, I think I felt a little burnout and my wife wanted to start her career and, just kind of balancing kids and some of the issues we have with our kids. We were like, hey, maybe it's time to. So I didn't really have a firm plan. I just knew I was done. And I knew that, she had enough income to kind of help get us going. So that's when me and two partners started Homestead Brand. That was November of 23. And, I'd been kind of in management my whole life. And at the end of the day, if you would have asked me, like, what do you want to do? It's just like be in my garage and tinker with my hands, like that's where I find some solace and peace. And so I was like, maybe I should just do that, and see what happens. So, yeah.
For those of us who do enjoy working with our hands, it's an extremely zen experience to just be able to be alone in your garage and focus on one task.
Yep.
And do nothing else, block everything else out of your mind,
right,
and just do that thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I think that too, that's what kind of played into some of my content where, when you're working alone and it's just you and yourself and the piece that you're working on, you start thinking about some of these bigger questions about work, what work is and how work impacts the family. And so I probably, get in my head too much, but a lot of my content is just really what am I thinking that day? What's something that I think is maybe not even worth sharing, but it's just, I just use social media as almost like a daily journal of random thoughts that I think are significant to human beings. And you mix it in with something aesthetically interesting, and hopefully it's better than some fart video that, are better than a lot of the entertainment that's just taking over hours of people's days.
Yeah, low effort, high
Engagement. That's right. Yeah.
So I guess kind of tell me about your process a little bit more, because it is heavily story focused.
Yeah.
So how does the idea start? These thoughts start, and then how do you develop it and then bring it together with the imagery that you generate?
Yeah. I listen to a lot of podcasts. That I got podcasts kind of going in the background. There's a lot of theology. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of startup. How I built this is probably the one I listen to the most. It's essentially, interviews of people that started businesses. So I've always got, some influence of something I'm hearing or just an observation about my own life. I'm a pretty reflective person. And so, I'll get an idea. I'll just use yesterday, for example. These bison bags are very aesthetically appealing. They've got unique textures, and I've been, criticized a lot by people that think that there's animal cruelty involved in the leather space. And somebody had sent me a message that was particularly like, how dare you, you're a horrible human. So I was like, okay, there's a theme, and then I'm reflecting on making this amazing bag that's going to last somebody a lifetime. And so I'll just start to kind of script it in my head. What's the message here? Should I feel bad that I'm using animal skins to make something that's going to last a lifetime? I don't script anything out. I spend a total of probably 10 minutes on a video. I don't use fancy editing software. I don't have a microphone. I hold the phone right up to my face and do a voiceover. Sometimes there's background noise, so I'll redo it. So, it's, some people might say, wow, the content's great, and I say, well, I try to make it interesting, but I got stuff to make. I can't afford to spend an hour and a half a day on a video. So I will, as I'm making something, have my tripod here. And I'll just think, okay, what's the most interesting shot? And I'll usually collect a dozen of them, and I shoot them in such a way that I don't have to edit much. So that's where I've just gotten efficient at putting it together.
Yeah, I'd say it's extremely efficient content. If you're spending 10 minutes at most on it, that's insane, because I come from a video production background.
Yeah.
And I know what goes into a lot of these things effort-wise, because people will spend a lot of time with lighting and all these other different things. But one of the problems with that is that takes away from the authenticity.
Yeah.
And when you're in a place like a space like this, like your workshop, and you have it fairly well lit, it's good enough to see things. You've got lots of natural light coming in from the window. You don't need to have a big fancy light set up with a ring light to perfectly get your face and all this stuff. You're in a place, you're doing things that is demonstrating your work. Right. What you're passionate about. You don't need anything else. That's the authenticity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I am lucky with, and I intentionally kept the windows unblocked. I get some incredible light in here, and it's been a very overcast year this year. So there's a lot of times I did buy a light early on, and I think I used it twice, and I was like, but there's sometimes in the evening where I'm like, there's something I wanted to capture, and I'll bring a light in, but sometimes I'm just using the LED on the sewing machine. And when you're zoomed in on content, you don't need a ton of light. And I'm not showing my face. A lot of the expensive equipment comes in when you're the subject, and I think that's where people get the ring lights and the mics, but I'm just showing what I'm working on, and so it doesn't require, a lot.
I think one of my favorite videos you were sitting here in front of the Venetian blinds, and it was at sunset, and it kind of was giving that 1930s and 40s Sam Spade look to you. And I think I don't know if you had some whiskey or not, but I think you were drinking cider.
It's probably my coffee. I have these volcano mugs. I have a collection of them. But I like to pause pause and ponder my place in this world. And sometimes the light comes in here just perfectly and I need a break. So I just kick my feet up on this sewing table and drink my coffee. And, if there's a message I want to convey or a song I want to play with it to capture the moment, I'll do that. But, you found that interesting. Like that would be the least engaging content I would do, because for an audience, it would be like, why do I care that this guy's kicking his feet up, drinking his coffee, So for me, I just try to find a balance. There are formulas to go viral. There are formulas to do these things well. I think for me, it's like, it's almost like a memoir. We can take time, we can write things down. We've got pictures on our phone, but at the end of the day, it's like, I'm just telling my own story and it lives as long as Meta's alive. And it's just my random musings. I find the creative process interesting, which I never thought I would, but yeah.
No, I think you can encapsulate that perfectly. And I think it shows the value of that saying, take the time to stop and smell the roses.
Yeah.
Because during that process of self-reflection, of telling the story that you're thinking about, you're doing double duty, because not only are you doing it for yourself, but you're also doing it for marketing purposes for your business.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's obviously, would I do this if I didn't have a business? Probably not. I probably wouldn't be on any of these platforms, to be quite honest. So yeah, there's definitely the things that I'm making are things that I want to sell to put food on the table. I've dabbled a little bit with, being more direct, like I make this, buy it, and sometimes I do just impulsively. Like,
well, a job, it's still your business.
Yeah. And it's authentic when I'm making something and I'm putting a video together and I'm holding the thing, sometimes I'm like, and you should buy it, like, because you should, because the alternative is probably you're going to pay more and it's going to be crap, so I'll occasionally just slip in a plug and a call to action, because I genuinely feel like a lot of people should buy this belt or this bag, but no, it's more about just showcasing what's out there and educating people. I think that the biggest narrative that I'm trying to convey is like, we've lost our consumer minds. Like a whole generation doesn't appreciate how much of the greatness of our economy was built on a collective effort of manufacturing here in the US. You go back and I think that's, we're seeing a lot of this nostalgia and vintage, it's because we're kind of coming together and we're like, wow, this is so cool. It looks so cool. It's still here because it was made so well. And we used to make this, and there's not a company in the US that you can find that makes that thing anymore. And so I think that's probably the biggest narrative is we used to make a lot of things. We decided, and there's a lot of stories, I read a lot about the willingness of the third generation family business, the grandson who, when China joined the WTO, booked the first flight to China. And this is a, North Carolina furniture business, and just said, you can have it all. You have whole cities and towns that, we just said, oh, don't worry, you'll fit in with the service sector just fine. Don't worry. And none of them did. So that's kind of the bigger narrative. Is like, maybe we should not consume as much. Maybe we should actually think about what we're buying and think about the people that are making it, and then think more broadly, like, what does that do to a national economy when people are getting up every day and they're working and producing? That's my soapbox now. I don't know what it'll be in 2 years.
No, and I think it's a real valid point, and I'll just go back to that whole Hermès purse thing that my wife got, because she is from that side of the world.
Yeah.
And so she is able to generate contacts in those areas. And the same purse that she got is literally, from that company, is the same one that makes it for Hermès. I don't think people understand that they're literally buying an idea of wealth. Mm-hmm. When they are buying those, because those purses go between $12,000 and $30,000.
Right.
And my wife got it for $200.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And you saw the quality. It is fake leather.
Yeah.
And it's just there for a look. It is not meant to do any other thing than convey an appearance of wealth. It doesn't actually function as it should. It's not something that's going to last.
Yeah.
But people are buying this idea. They're not buying the utility.
Yeah. And I think probably the second meta narrative there is that exact idea, where people are lied to and duped every single day from a marketing standpoint. And we've lost, I think, integrity in a lot of that. A lot of the big brands and a lot of small brands too. I think I did a video. I'll probably do another one soon. It's not that hard, as we've discussed, to start a brand now. The tools are plug and play. So I'll see kind of a new company that out of nowhere, they've got 10,000 followers and they've got really nice imagery. The first thing I'll go to the about page and I sniff it out. Everything about it would tell you it's USA made and that it's made by craftsmen and it's made by some guy in his garage. And all you have to do is read a little further to realize that that's the furthest thing from the truth, So it's Leon, Mexico. A lot of people will say crafted by artisans in the United States in partnership with our artisan team in Leon, Mexico. What that means is they don't do anything in the United States except stage photos, but everything is being done again with exploited labor. And so, it's definitely, I'm a really bad guy to bring to a party when there's a lot of money. Because when people have their name brand stuff, a lot of times, and then somebody will say, this is my, Grant does leather work. And the first thing they want to do is show me their bag. And I'll ruin the evening pretty quickly because I'll just be like, there's probably, $4 in labor there and $8 in material. How much did you pay for it? And people don't want to hear that. So, but they bought into a brand, and brand building is an art in itself. I can't, the morality of it bothers me and it's deceptive. But I guess that's how big businesses grow and big brands are made, not necessarily through their ethics, but really through their business salve. And can you convince people to buy? My kids are in the whole sneaker space, and I tell them the same thing. You're bidding on something that costs Nike $12 and think about what you're willing to pay for it. So that's branding genius. But is it good? Is it right? Is it ethical? Are you thinking at all about where it's made and how it was made? Anyways, I think those are just questions I think they're good to ponder. I just think they're good to ponder. A lot of people will say this is capitalism at its best and free market economy. And sure, I think we can have both. We can still celebrate the free market and globalization, but it doesn't mean we have to check our brains out completely and not even think about how it impacts our cities and our towns.
And I don't know if you've really considered yourself in this kind of position, but what you are doing is more or less taking on the role of a teacher, of an instructor.
Yeah.
And it's specific to your subject matter.
Yeah.
But that is really what you're doing through these social media posts. And one of the things I'm trying to do with instructional design at Eastern is get instructors over there to see how things can be done, because things have changed a lot in the last just 20 years. Forget about the last, 500 years.
Right.
Where instruction hasn't really changed much at all.
That's right.
The structure is exactly the same. The way teachers teach is exactly the same, but people aren't learning the exact same way that they've been learning prior to that.
Yeah.
And unless people are willing to change to match that, a lot of institutions, I think, are going to start going down.
Yeah, that is probably something, and you mentioned it, where universities may start falling. It's simply because there isn't a lot of incentives to actually bring relevant teaching methods to the class that are engaging. And there's a system in place, especially if you're a state employee, where you don't really need to perform. You're there and you're tenured so long as you don't do something really, really bad. So that probably would be ripe for reform, in my opinion. I'm glad my kids did Running Start. I said, hey, this is on the taxpayer dime. It's on my dime. But, there are many cases where I said, can you imagine paying X amount of dollars for that course, and they're just like, you're right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of refinement that needs to happen. There's probably a little bit more accountability that should probably happen. But if I'm not incentivized as an instructor to change my ways, I'm probably just going to do what's needed to keep my job and not necessarily push further in my endeavor to make my content relevant. And so I don't know how you persuade people in the public sector. You got to hustle to earn your keep. I'm sorry, in the private sector. In the public sector, there's a lot of times where you don't. It's just have you keep your head, below water enough. But I think these tools, there's probably a lot of people that are embracing these tools and are making the content engaging. But I think there's a major evolution in instruction. The world's knowledge is there. It's there. I think I heard it best, university and even high school to some degree, the discipline there is still to teach kids the process of learning. And I think there's a place for that still. When you're memorizing your multiplication tables, even though you've got a calculator, even though ChatGPT can answer any question you want, there's still something good about the brain developing and processing, rote memorization. Those things I think are still valuable. It's just the brain is developing and those things are good. We just did multiplication table contest at the dinner table the other night. And I told my wife, I said, I know all these because I did exactly what this child is doing with flashcards, So I was like, had I skipped all that and just said, I can learn multiplication through life, like there's very limited life experience where you're actually doing 6 times 6. And so I think there's a place for that, but I do think that there's a huge need to kind of morph to the times when it comes to instructional methodology.
Yeah, so I'm here just a month, honestly. It's my first month at EWU. And so I've been exposing myself as much as possible by literally going around and just walking into these different departments and seeing who I can run into and talk to.
Yeah.
That's been my methodology. It's kind of like, I don't want to compare myself, but it's like back in the day when Socrates would go around and try and find all the wise men.
Yeah.
And he would test them on their knowledge. And his goal was different.
Yeah, right. Uh-huh.
My goal is more to empower those people because they are actually experts, in their fields, of course, and they have this wealth of information, and they are really passionate about their work.
Yeah.
But, COVID came along.
Yeah.
And I think that hit everybody who is not prepared for it really hard.
Right. Yeah.
Because all these instructors who are used to teaching in person had to move all that content online into a format they'd never used before.
Yeah. Right.
So they had gotten hit from a left hook.
Yeah. Right.
Already. And it is starting to come back, which is the good thing. They're moving pretty much all the content from online back into the classroom.
Yeah.
So that is good news there. And then the other thing is, again, you're working with a lot of these instructors who just aren't familiar with the technology.
Right.
And that's kind of where I come in, is that I say, okay, here's the tools that I have that I can bring to you. And here's some examples that we can go from. And if we can integrate these into your classroom, either by flipping the classroom or by just supplementing it, because you have the in-classroom stuff and you have online content, it all has to be there together. Then we can start changing things around. And gamification is a big part of that. Creating a narrative that wraps the course, that it's telling a cohesive story throughout the whole length of the course.
Yeah.
It's putting the content in context for those students.
Right. Yeah.
And even like this, like your Instagram posts, it's telling a story all throughout about your business.
Right.
It's really a course about your business is what you're telling.
Yeah. And for somebody that, I get, a few a week, but it's people that are like, I want to get to where I'm making a living on this, and I can do it full time, what advice do you have? So, it's definitely that people are kind of watching the business develop. And I think it is through a more engaging, honest, I did one, I think it was the most meaningful one. It was, 6 months ago, but there was a lot of people that said, you're stupid. Like, you're making good money. I was making decent money, and like leatherwork is a hobby, like don't mix a hobby with, business. And I think it was in May of last year where we all got our first paycheck,
I remember that one.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And that was real, that was like, and that was from, November to May, so we went 6 months without taking any pay, which was a risk we took. And then, we all took decent pay, and we've continued to maintain that, so that's, I think, inspirational. It's not made up. It's real. I didn't want to show the check amount, but I think that inspires people to be like, okay, there is, if I really want to do this, I'm not saying it's easy, but, you got to put your nose to the grindstone. And there's obviously a lot of local business we do. There's wholesale accounts we do, but, Meta has done an incredible job of consuming the attention of, I don't know what percent of the developed and developing world's time is spent on their platforms. That would be an interesting stat. It's probably shocking. So that's where people's attention is, and so it'll be something else in 3 years, so everyone's trying to kind of anticipate what's the next evolution. AI is gaining a ton of ground, so what does that look like from a marketing standpoint? I personally think we're going to get so AI saturated that there's going to be probably another platform that's just anti-AI. And then there'll be another platform that's like totally analog. We don't publish anything digitally except where we're meeting and what we're going to talk about, because people are craving substantive, human to human interaction.
We're going to go back to, Morse code.
Well, yeah. Well, I think it's been probably 8 years now, but yeah, I read about this Bay Area coffee shop where it was all typewriters. And I thought, I like that. I like the sound of a typewriter, but that's not going to last. I'm sure if you went to that same. So, it's really the balance of embracing modernization and the tools and technology we have with, my name is Disold Soul, just because it's how do we do these things without forfeiting our soul? And I see a lot of people, we can do that easily, but at the end of the day, like, we're not robots yet. Science hasn't quite figured out. The big question right now is, like, does AI have a conscience? Can a computer empathize? And can a computer say through code, this is the right decision, but I'm going to weave in a thread of empathy and do another thing? Because that's what we do. That's what our computers do. So, I find that stuff very fascinating.
I think we really covered a lot of incredibly valuable information here that I think that the instructors at EWU can really take advantage of. So I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me.
Sure.
And this is going to be great. Thanks.
Good. Yeah, absolutely.